Welcome to the Mission Matters. The Mission Matters is a partnership between 1615 and Missionexis, who have a shared passion to mobilize God's people to be a part of His mission. The Mission Matters is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Essler, president of Missionexis. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And now, here are your hosts, Matthew Ellison and Ted Essler.
Welcome once again to the Mission Matters podcast. I'm Matthew Ellison, and as always, I am joined by my good friend and partner in crime, Ted Essler. So we always have a softball question. This one, pretty random. What movie, Ted, can you watch over and over again without tiring of it? Let me give mine first. Mine is definitely Braveheart. I think I watch it once or twice annually. It just fires me up. And it's interesting. I don't want to spiritualize Braveheart, but God uses it to really fan the missions flame in my heart. It just makes me want to be a part of something bigger than myself, larger than my own interests. I can quote many lines, but I won't do that for you today. So Braveheart is my pick. How about you?
Well, before I tell you mine, Matthew, I'll have you know that I have a friend, and he was the music. He's actually the sound and production editor for that movie Braveheart, and he got a Grammy for it. And he's a great guy. If you ever come by Orlando, I'll try to introduce you to him. He's an awesome musician and sound guy. But anyway, I actually do not like to ever watch movies twice. It drives my family crazy because they'll want to watch a movie again. I'm like, I've already seen it. I like the element of surprise. But if there's any one movie that I've watched multiple times, I mean, the Lord of the Rings movies, I've watched those a bunch. But I love the movie Hoosiers. And if you've never seen it, there's the basketball story, but the real story is the redemption of an alcoholic father and how the main protagonist in the movie, who himself had a major life failure, sees the world differently because of his failure, and then basically, does this wonderful thing to this alcoholic father. It's just a great movie, and it always encourages me, and it reminds me that there's a better story in our suffering than we might see at the beginning. So anyway, that'd be my movie, Hoosiers. And today we have Lorrie Lindgren from Thrive Ministries with us. And Lorrie, we're going to send that question to you next. Any movie you like to watch over and over?
Okay, so I just have to admit it's a chick flick. So
that's fine.
Ever After, with Drew Barrymore. And I think it's just that thing, of wanting to be known for who you are and not any position or title that you might have, or privileges that you might have. So, yep, just that chick flick.
What's the title again? One more time.
Ever After.
Ever After.
Like happily ever after.
Last night I came home after being out in town, and my wife was watching Sense and Sensibilities, and that would definitely be her movie that she watched.
Oh, yeah.
So, Lorrie, could we start by having you tell us a little bit about who you are? And then the question we really want to pose to you is, how did Thrive come about, and what are you trying to accomplish with Thrive?
Oh, it is my privilege to do that. So actually, the original name of our ministry was Women of the Harvest. And so it was started in 1997 by two friends of mine from my home church in the Denver area. So our founder was Lori Bolthouse, and she and her husband, Bill, were headed out for their first full-time term overseas. And the Lord gave her the vision to start a publication, actually a magazine is what it ended up being, that would be written just for missionary women. And so she got the idea. Another young woman from our church took it and ran with it. And so in the fall of 1997, the ministry began by publishing a 16-page hard copy magazine that was shipped first class around the world. So that's how we got started. But it was because she was just wondering, as a new worker on the field, what is it like, done multiple short-term trips, but what will it be like when I buy a one-way ticket and I don't have that to look forward to, that I'll be home in a couple of weeks and I'm having to actually adapt to the culture and that I'm here long term. And so we kind of did a survey to see, was there a need for that on the field? Would women actually subscribe to a magazine like that? And had an overwhelming response of, yes, I've been looking for something like this, something where I could read articles from other women on the field who get my life and that can talk about both the joys and the challenges of living in another culture. So that's how we got started. And I think we had it in the hard copy form for about 8 years, and then we ran into financial challenges. So we shifted to an online publication in 2005. So that's how we got started.
That Lorrie served in the same organization as I was with, and she was down south of us in the Balkans while we were up north. So
she was, yeah.
I remember that first issue that came out because we distributed it to women on our team. So
yeah, we produced it here in Denver, and so we couldn't, of course, go on site and take photo background of everybody who was writing the articles. So a lot of my friends had to serve as those models in those days so we could illustrate what was being talked about in those articles.
Indeed.
Laura, we often hear about the disproportionate number of women to men on the mission field. Maybe you can shed some light on that. What type of numbers are out there, women serving as missionaries?
So, it's obvious women have always played an integral role in the modern missionary movement. And historically, about 65% of all missionaries are women. And as we have done research and actually worked with Ted and his team, we have estimated that there's about 32,000 North American women who are currently working full-time as career workers. So we're defining that as women from the US and Canada. And so 32,000 is that number. If you opened it up and you included, women from other nationalities that are still serving with North American agencies, it jumps up to about 75,000. But our focus is for North American women, meaning US and Canada. So that number is 32,000.
Now, Lorrie, I don't know if you have the answer to this, but how many men from the US serving? Do you know that number by chance?
Let's see. Well, you got to do that math. What's 35% so that we can jump it up? It seems like it is around 60,000, 50 to, no, I'm saying that's the total number of workers. So you'd have to, sorry.
Ted, you're the scientist. Come on.
Well.
Ted's the scientist.
Yeah, I would say, the numbers that I've seen is about 60 to 65% of all missionaries are in fact women.
Agree with that. So if we say 32,000 are women, then that's guessing.
No, about another third again, so.
All right, we're all bad in our math, huh?
84,000, let's say, men or so. Yeah. Well, how do you go about fulfilling your mission?
Well, as I mentioned, we got started with with a print magazine. And then a couple of years later, actually, Lorrie, when she was serving in Eastern Europe, was saying, another way that I think we could care for these women and provide the kind of community that they need is to host an in-person retreat. And so we tried one out in Istanbul, Turkey in 1998, and that was just really successful. And that then has become one of our pillar programs. And so we actually have been in 64 different locations hosting retreats around the world. So 47 of those have been internationally, and 17 of those have been held in the US for women who are on their furlough, their home assignment, or that they're transitioning off the field. So if I think a lot of people are aware of our retreat ministry, And if you've heard anything about us, you know that we seek to provide care using all 5 love languages. And so really part of the focus for Thrive is that we want to provide community for women who are working overseas. So they will say that they just feel so alone and isolated. And so that is something we're trying to achieve at an in-person retreat, is that they get to meet women from other sending agencies, and they get to be face to face with other women who get their life and their desire to move to another culture to share the gospel. And the other primary focus of those retreats is to provide intentional time to just step away for both self-care and soul care. So we do that in a myriad of ways.
I assume that COVID has hit those events pretty hard.
It has. So we've actually had to cancel 5 in-person retreats since last March. And so in the shadows of COVID, the Lord has birthed a brand new opportunity for us to minister to these women in an online format, actually through Zoom. And I know a lot of us are so tired of being on Zoom. And we wondered, as we were putting this together, how can we still provide that community for them, you know, when you're in a live session. So we've actually held 2 major events that we are calling Gather, and it's a 5-day online event where we were offering sessions every other hour for those 5 days. And so, you know, our goal was that we wanted to provide sessions that would be live to every woman around the globe, no matter what time zone she was in. So we actually began our first session at 3 a.m. in Denver and concluded the last one at midnight. And so our team was working around the clock so that they could be in these sessions. We provided 36 group sessions that they could choose from on all different topics. Each day we provided worship and Bible teaching. They were able to join a prayer group. We actually had 72 prayer groups going every day. And then in addition to all those 36 sessions, they could choose to set up a one-on-one appointment with some professional volunteers that we had. That didn't come out right. Not professional volunteers that were professionals in different areas. So we had physicians, we had counselors, we had nutritionists and physical therapists and life coaches and spiritual directors. And we had over 600 of those appointments were made by the women who attended Gather.
Wow.
So I think we were just amazed that even though it was on Zoom, the way we did breakout sessions, they got to meet in community groups. Some of those were oriented to what region of the world that they're serving in. Others were topically oriented. So for example, are you separated from your kids right now during COVID? Do you have parents who are aging back in the States and you're not there, or whatever those topics are? Mm-hmm. They got to be a part of that. So, you know, just amazed that even though we couldn't be in person, that community feel was still established through the online format.
That's great, Lorrie. So you mentioned isolation as one of the big issues that women on the field face. Maybe you can share with our audience some of the other issues that are unique to women. Maybe not unique to women, but maybe they especially affect them in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, besides the articles that they write for the publication and then being with them face to face, we've definitely identified what are some of those common themes. So I think we probably are all aware of the isolation that they can feel, disappointments of ministry not looking like what they thought it would look like when they first left for the field, the loneliness, you know, when you're still learning a language and you don't have another English speaking friend that you can process life in and ministry with, just how alone that feels. And then just the cultural adjustments. But when we are in those settings and retreats, we also learn what are some of those biggest challenges that they face. So you've got and things on what does it look like for a woman to be in leadership on a team. The loss of ministry passion that comes a lot of times from fatigue, the need for self-care. When we're at retreats, we always do a workshop on grief and loss and transition, helping women identify what are both tangible losses that they have experienced as well as intangible losses. And a lot of times they just haven't stopped to realize the layers and layers that they are carrying. And they've never stopped to really grieve those and deal with those. Transition is another huge topic. You all know that because of how many coworkers come through on their teams. You know, you'll have a member leave the team and bringing on somebody new. Lots of transition issues. Marital stressors. You know, we all have to work on our marriages, but you put somebody in another culture and you've got all those other factors that put stresses on their marriage. Lots of depression issues and singleness. You know, we often talk about in most careers, we don't have to have a special ministry for singles. That's not something that we talk about. But when you're in a cross-cultural setting on teams, we need to address singleness. And again, that is viewed so differently on different teams. And then, of course, issues with their kids. MK issues always affect a woman and how her kids are doing.
Yeah, I don't think realize this, but we are a majority single culture in the United States. I believe that's true in Canada. Most of the West is now majority single. So let me ask you this question. So I work with a very broad network. I assume you do too. When it comes to particularly, you know, women in leadership and the different roles that women can or can't have, there's a really broad spectrum.
Yeah.
Does that influence what you do much at Thrive?
You know, I think we just want to acknowledge that that's there. So, for instance, when we're in retreats, when we put them in small groups, they get to let us know if they want to be in a group that's just for singles or in a mixed group. And we have different topics that come up. And so certainly the whole thing about women in leadership is viewed so differently in different agencies. So we work with about 700 different mission agencies. We work closely with having them women come. And so, yes, the women want to talk about that, you know, and then when they come back to the US, and this is an age-old topic within missions, you know, you have women on the field who are doing church planting and they do every part of that role. And then you come back to your sending churches and you're not allowed to give the Sunday morning message, you know, like, what's that all about? And so, yeah, that's something they want to talk about.
Wow. So, Lorrie, let us know about the role men might play in helping women missionaries be effective and fruitful on the field.
You know, when we survey women what they feel their felt needs are, one of the top things is to be understood and cared for and prayed for. And so just the fact that men acknowledge the needs that are there and give permission and encouragement for them to take time away for self-care and soul care is just huge. So, you know, when women will register for a retreat and we'll say, well, how did you get to be here? And if a woman says to me, well, my husband signed me up. He knew I needed this time away just to be with other women. It's like the room cheers for them. Like, wow, you have a husband who understands you need to just be with women sometime, you know, and if they hear from their agency leaders, we know you need time away from your life and ministry just for self-care and soul care. Just speaks volumes to them.
Last question. for you, and that is obviously the mission world is changing. A lot of non-Western missionaries now. Do you work with them as well? I know earlier you said you're focused on North American agencies, but I would guess you still are interfacing more diversely than that.
Yeah, we are. And this actually has been an area that has been really hard for Thrive and for our board to kind of wrestle through. So in the beginning days, I think we just assumed we're North Americans and we're serving North Americans. And we actually ran into some snags in the retreat part of the ministry, where if we had women from other sending nations attending a retreat, it changed the dynamics in the group in a way that was challenging to fully meet the needs of the American women. And it's always hard to describe this because we don't want to sound elitist, but it's like if we're trying to create an environment where women can come and just really let their hair down and be themselves, we want to provide worship in English. We want to bring gifts that are from America. We want to have humor that's from America. But if we have a small group, the example I like to give is when we were in Goa, India, and we had some delightful women from India that came to the retreat, but we had a lot of American women that were having a hard time adjusting to the Indian culture. But then that became a conversation that they couldn't talk about because they would never want to offend their Indian sisters that were there at the table. And so that's where we kind of fine-tuned our ministry to saying, you know what, for the retreat part of the ministry, actually, we need to limit it to North Americans in order to provide the kind of environment to really let them relax and be open about what their challenges are. Now, for the Gather event, the online event, we realized that was an opportunity that we could open the doors. And so for this last Gather about a month ago, we actually had 31 different passport countries represented from the women who attended. And we had 455 missionary women that joined us for that 5-day conference. So, so that is one area that we have been able to open it up. And of course, for our online publication that we now call Connection, anyone can subscribe to that for free. So we can include non-North Americans in that setting.
As you're talking about these retreats and times of refreshing, I'm reminded of the words of Jesus to the disciples. You know, the crowds are pressing. And he says, come away with me and rest. And so what a vital ministry you provide. And Ted said, that was the last question. I'm going to give you one more. Give us a couple of prayer requests that people could offer up to women missionaries. There's a book called Windows on the World. It's the child publication of Operation World. And they have a section for MKs, how to pray for MKs. But I just thought about it. There's nothing for women. So what would be a couple of specific prayer requests that people could pray for women missionaries?
Well, I think because the two main things that we have identified is the need for them to be in community where they feel like they're known and understood and cared for. And the number two is just that they will take time for self-care and soul care. So, you know, this isn't just women, but cross-cultural workers are giving all the time. And it's often hard for them to receive. And so, so just to be aware of that. So we have a little resource that we make available. We call it our member care quiz. And I like to give this to both agency and church leaders. And it's just a list of about 20 questions of ways that we want them to be aware of how to best care for their workers. And so even if they think they're doing a great job, they'll often pick up on one or two things. But we also give some very practical suggestions. And some of those are like, you know, when you get an email newsletter, just hit reply and just say, got it, I'm praying for, and pick out one thing from the letter to say that you're praying for. Because as you know, they spend hours trying to prepare this newsletter to give an update on what God is doing. And sometimes it feels like it just goes into this black hole and nobody ever reads it. So just to hit reply and say, got it, praying for you, or whatever. And then think of ways that you can encourage them in self-care and soul care. So maybe it's somebody you've supported at $100 a month, for decades. But maybe you send an extra gift of $150 and say, why don't you as a couple go away for a night or go out to a nice dinner or something where they feel like they're remembered. Because so often they just feel like, we get the checks and we know people are there and praying, but it's those intentional little touch points that really make them feel remembered and cared for.
It's beautiful. So, Ted, this is the time on the show where we talk about something you like. So let us know what it is.
Well, this time around, I want to share with you this little book here. Now, this is a 1840s or 50s. I don't really know because there's no date in it, but I've tried to research the publisher, and it at least is it's no earlier than about 1855. But it's a copy of David Brainerd's journal, edited by John Edwards. And I just mention it because it's a very awesome go-to if you have a short little window of time, you want a devotional thought. And, Brainerd can be a little melancholy, so you got to be ready for that. But he's very deep, and it really gives you the sense of sacrifice for the Great Commission that he made, but also just the kind of everyday regularness of his thought life. He ministered to Native Americans, and it's a great one. Now, Matthew, I believe you've got probably an updated version of this. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got John Thornbury's here, Life of Brainerd. It's an updated one, probably a little easier to read, but
yeah, I would guess it is easier to read.
For sure. I refer to it a lot.
It's a great little read. So I keep this one around.
That's something you like.
What's that?
I said that is something you like.
Something I really like.
Here's a crazy thought. His life is still making impact.
It is crazy. There are so many little facts about him that if you start reading this, it really can blow you away. Just the fact that he died in Jonathan Edwards' house, and his life became a testimony. Jonathan Edwards, we all know him as a great theologian pastor, but he was a missionary and lived and worked among Native Americans himself. So anyway, something I like.
Great. Well, Lorrie, thank you for being with us today. It was a great conversation and, of course, so important. I think in the show notes, we'll have reference to your website, but can you just shout it out right now as well so people can get a hold of you?
It's pretty easy. It's just thriveministry.org.
Great.
Thanks, Lorrie.
You're welcome. Good to be with you all.
Before you go, would you visit our hosts' websites? There you will find a wealth of interesting and challenging information about the state of the Great Commission. They are 1615.org and missionexus.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss one. Mission Matters is presented through a partnership between 1615 Missions Coaching and Missio Nexus.